Facilities that make this program possible are provided by the City of Highland Park. Programs are produced independently by members of the community. The City of Highland Park is not affiliated with the following program or the producers of public access programming and is not responsible for the content. The following program does not reflect the opinions of the City of Highland Park.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Dotson, and I'm the founder and program coordinator for Highland Park Poetry, as well as your host today on Poetry Today. I'm very excited. I've got a fabulous guest who in the Chicagoland area, everybody who's at all involved with poetry knows, and that's Wilda Morris. Wilda has won awards for free verse and formal poetry and haiku, including 2 pushcart nominations. And if you don't know what a pushcart prize is, it's a nice, highly respected thing. So it's great to be nominated. Wilda has also led poetry workshops for children and for adults in 3 states, including workshops at the Green Lake Conference Center in Wisconsin. Wilda's book is Szechuan Shrimp and Fortune Cookies, Poems from a Chinese Restaurant. And that was published by Rockford Writers Guild Press. Her poems have found homes in a large number of publications, including the Wisconsin Fellowship of Poets Calendar, Christian Science Monitor, Chaffin Journal, Frog Pond, and the Kerf, including many of Highland Park Poetry's very own challenges and chapbooks and online galleries. So anytime you want to go to our website, you'll be sure to stumble across at least a few poems by Wilda. Wilda also is well known for her poetry challenge at wildamorris.blogspot.com. She provides a monthly poetry contest for other poets. I remember I was so excited when one of my poems was selected. It was a sonnet, I believe, and I was featured on the blog, so that was like, woohoo, all right. Wilda is also the former president of the Illinois State Poetry Society, as well as Poets and Patrons of Chicago. She presently is the workshop chair for Poets and Patrons, so she's the one who finds the workshop leaders and coordinates the programs, and those are done at the Harold Washington Library, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and then I think last but not least, there's so many things that you do. You also mentioned that you are all for the National Federation of State Poetry Societies. I can't believe I got all those words out. Okay, that you actually coordinate their contest for a manuscript publication.
Yes, it's called the Stevens Poetry Manuscript Competition. We had 200 submissions this year, and I'm not allowed to send more than 100 to the judge, so I have to screen the manuscripts, and then I get to call the winner, which is always the best part of the job, and introduce the winner at the National Convention, where she'll be reading from her manuscript.
Oh, fabulous.
From her book. Part of what she wins is having it published.
Okay.
And she'll do a signing, and that's in Denver.
Oh, so this year I remember I think it was last year they were in Texas, and
yes,
this year that was
it's
Denver.
Different places each year.
All right. When will they come to Highland Park? I don't know. Or Illinois. Okay. Well, that's great. Thank you so much for coming today. And you are a busy lady. I guess let's start talking about how you got started in poetry.
Well, I loved poetry as a child. My grandmother used to recite it to me. She memorized a lot of poems when she was in school. And my mother recited sometimes, but she more often read poetry to me. But both of them taught me to love poetry. My first publication was in an anthology of high school poetry.
Oh, wow.
That was many years ago. And I didn't, when I went to college, I passed out of the English requirement, and unfortunately I didn't take any English classes or creative writing classes or literature or any of that, because I was obsessed with political science at the time.
Oh, wow. All right.
But I did, after I was married, I published a few poems. But then we adopted 5 children over a short period of time, and I was in up to here.
Yeah, sure.
So I didn't follow through very much, but there were two things that got me really active in poetry. One was the death of my oldest granddaughter just before her 7th birthday. And I had to have something to do with the feelings that were related to that. And also, I was a volunteer at the Green Lake Conference Center representing educational ministries of our denomination. And the program chair wanted me to attend workshops and conferences so that I would get to know the people who were there and could let them know why I was there and what I could do for them. So, and there was a writers' conference. That's where I got to work. First place I got to work with Ellen Court, who was the first poet laureate of Wisconsin.
Oh, neat.
Where I met Robin Chapman, who's one of the most published poets in Wisconsin. And I'm still taking workshops from her.
Oh, yeah, she's very popular.
She is.
We got to get her on the show.
That's true. You should.
Wow, no, but so continue. I mean, so from that, taking that workshop at the was it the Green Lake Conference Center, that it just sort of.
They had an annual writers' workshop at that time. Unfortunately, they don't have it anymore.
Okay.
But I still go to workshops at the Clearing, where Robin Chapman teaches, and.
I've heard of that. Where is that?
It's in Door County, in Allison Bay.
Okay, all right.
Beautiful place.
Yeah. Now, is Al DeGeneva involved with that at all?
Yes.
Okay.
He teaches there.
I thought I recognized the name The Clearing, but I've never been. Okay.
Well, it was founded by Jens Jensen, who is known in the Chicago area because of his work with the Park District.
The famous landscape architect. Right. He actually had a studio here in Highland Park, and we have a garden, a park named after him, and several examples of his work. So everybody in Highland Park knows who Jens Jensen is.
That's good.
Okay. Wow. So then, but you've continued to write and challenge yourself, and boy, get involved in everything. I mean, like I said, I feel like ever since I started Highland Park Poetry, and I didn't know many people in the poetry community. I kept bumping into you or your name or on everything. You seem to have.
Well, now your name's on everything.
Oh.
Everybody in the Chicago area knows who you are.
Well, but it's taking time. But I'm just so impressed with all that you do, in terms of encouraging people to write, and to try new forms and.
I do. I really like to experiment. I even invented a form myself.
What's that?
Well, I call it the snake. Would you like to hear a snake program?
I would love to hear a snake poem.
Okay, I've got one here.
How does it work?
Well, this poem actually developed out of a failed golden shovel poem.
Okay.
And the golden shovel, as I'm sure you know, you use a quotation, and the words of the quotation are the words at the ends of each of the lines. And it wasn't working too well for this particular the way I was trying to do it, so I decided to snake the words through the poem. And I actually have some poems where I have 3 stanzas, and one is a golden shovel, one is a snake, and the other one is like an acrostic where the words are down the left side.
Okay, all right.
Using the same quote in each stanza.
And now what do you call that form?
Well,
snake
I just call
special or something like that?
I just call it a golden shovel, snake, and acrostic or something.
Oh, I see, okay.
But this is the snake. The quotation is from the Comedy of Errors by Shakespeare, and this was published in the Rockford Review. The quote is, "We talk with goblins, owls, and sprites. If we obey them not, this will ensue. They'll suck our breath or pinch us black and blue."
Okay.
So this is the poem with all of those words snaking through the poem. "Not dark woods, but the city's heart we wander, fearful, almost hesitant to talk. The moon hides behind clouds. With trepidation we tread on shadows, hear goblins groan and growl. In a tree 3 owls give hellish hoots. Call out our names and seek to tempt it, and seek to lead us on. Through fog we see 6 sprites who tempt us to forget our destination. If we follow, their magic will control. We ponder where to go and whether to obey our own instincts or follow them wherever they lead. We turn away, but not in time. Invisible cords pull us this way and that. We cannot do what we will, but only what they force us to. What will ensue? Owls hoot again, the goblins groan. Now they'll hold us captive. Like children, we suck our thumbs for comfort, wish for our friends to come and save us. We feel the breath of ghouls hot against our skin. Will they kill us or enslave us? Are we in a dream? I pinch myself to see, but it seems real. They hold us captive. Streetlights blink out. All is black until we reach out to each other and hold hands. Sprites disappear. The sky turns blue.
Oh my goodness. Well, you definitely seem to be inspired by the mood of the Shakespeare quote, but it seems very scary. You know.
I use a lot of quotations in various
Right.
ways. A lot of times I start a poem with a line or sometimes two from another poem.
Oh,
I always
okay.
give credit to the original
Sure.
poet.
Do you find that method, I mean, that inspires you? So how does it happen? Do you collect a bunch of quotes that you like and then say, oh, I want to write a poem today. Let me go through my index file of...
Well, I do a little of that, but sometimes it's just because I don't know what to write about, so I pick up a book of poetry.
Okay.
One year at poetry camp, I had another project in mind I wanted to work on, but it wasn't working for me, and Robin Chapman always brings oodles of books.
Okay.
So we had like 2 writing times each day while we were there with prompts. So I just would pick up a book and I found a line, and I wrote a whole bunch of really weird little poems, and they were all kind of surreal nightmare poems.
Mm.
And when I got home, I put them all into one poem, but each one started with a different quote.
Okay.
But I gave them each a subtitle, which was a time of night.
Ah, okay.
And they ended up published as one poem
Oh,
in
interesting.
After Hours.
Oh, okay. Oh, neat.
So it was, the whole thing was like one long nightmare, or continuous
Right.
series of nightmares all night.
Oh my gosh. Well, no, that sounds great, and I like hearing about your process, how you're inspired, and
I have one poem here that starts with a line and a half from Lee Young Lee, if you'd like to hear it.
Yeah, yeah.
This is sometimes when you pick a line like that, it takes you in some direction you have no idea where you're going.
Okay.
So I think it was Robert Frost said, if there's no surprise for the poet, there's no surprise for the reader.
Yeah.
So
okay.
this one surprised me where it went. It's called Mnemonic. I stole the title of Lee Young Lee's poem as well as
Okay.
a line and a half. I was cold once, so my father took off his blue sweater. He wrapped me in it. I slid my short arms into the long sleeves. Father leaned down and buttoned each button. I was 5 years old, and the sweater had 5 buttons. Carry me, I begged. I'm tired. Father picked me up. As my arms flew around his neck, the sleeves flapped like blue wings. Now I was warm, but Father was cold. He carried me 7 blocks and was worn out when he climbed the steps to our door. This is how I remember it. But when I was 5, I was never wrapped in a warm sweater with buttons down the front. And I had no father.
Oh, wow. I did not see that one coming. I did not see that coming. That's amazing.
I didn't
Wow.
see it coming as I wrote it either. So that's part of
Wow.
the fun of taking a line and just seeing.
What was the original line from the Lee Young Lee poem?
It was a line and a half. I was
Okay.
cold once, so my father took off his blue sweater. He wrapped me in it.
Okay, so that was from his poem, and then that becomes the sort of the entry point for your poem.
Yes.
Interesting. Oh, very cool.
He has a lot of wonderful lines. Even if I don't like his poem, frequently he has a line that just takes my breath away, and I love the line.
Well, you took my breath away on that
So-
one. That was amazing. Wow. Well, I think one of the things I'd love to hear about are what are some of the current projects you're working on?
Well, I have a manuscript that's essentially ready to go out. I have 2 poems. I'm not sure where in the collection to put them. which is why I haven't sent it yet. And it's a poem, it's a book of poems basically about my favorite uncle. And it's dedicated to him, my Uncle Norman, and my Aunt Irene, his wife. And they had no children. So they paid special attention to nephews and nieces more than the uncles who had children of their own could do.
Right.
And they were, I think, favorites of most of the nephews and nieces, at least the ones who lived close enough. And they...
Was this in the Chicago, in Illinois? Or
No, I lived in Iowa City, and they lived in Coralville,
Okay.
which is a fairly big city now, but it was small. But they lived out in the country and raised goats.
Oh, wow.
And chickens.
Okay. All right.
And it was always fun to take the interurban train out to Coralville, and we would just say, let us off at Goat Island or Goat Hollow.
Was that their farm?
They knew where to let us off.
So the train would stop right by their place?
Very close, yes.
Or very close. Oh, my goodness. Wow.
And if we were standing there waiting, they would stop and pick us up when it was time to come home, even though it wasn't an
Real
official stop.
Oh, okay.
But
boy, times have changed.
that's true. So I do have one poem from that collection.
Okay.
It's called Communion. This was a winning poem from the National Federation of State Poetry Society contest one year, so it's in their book that they publish, Communion. While his brothers rose each Sunday, dressed in suits and clerical collars, Uncle Norman pulled on overalls, milked goats he called by name, walked aisles of string beans, broke one bean like bread and put it on his tongue. He looked up at the dome of sky, drank in sun like wine, read epistles written by swallows. He knelt beside a milkweed, watched a monarch, newly risen from its cocoon, fold and fold its wings. A choir of eastern bluebirds chanted a gospel of grace. Uncle Norman whistled his own doxology, gave thanks for his small sanctuary.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful. That's really
Thank you.
lovely. Yeah.
My manuscript is called The Unapproved Uncle because he was highly approved by us nephews and nieces, but he didn't hold a job much, and he didn't go to church all the time, and he smoked, and so he didn't have quite the approval of our parents
okay.
that he
I
had
see.
of us youngsters.
Oh,
So-
yeah. Well, I'm sure it was a lot of fun to go visit him, and kids like to be the center of attention. I mean,
True.
so
Very true.
You know,
And to get out of town and
sure.
wander
Yeah.
over the fields and climb the locust tree where you could see way into town, and
Yeah.
milk the goats. And
My aunt in Pennsylvania had goats for a time in my youth, and I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, so
okay.
so it was always kind of whoa, but very exciting.
Right.
Yeah, they can be stinky, as I recollect.
I don't really remember that aspect, but I was
Oh,
so
okay.
happy to be there. So,
Okay.
other project that I'm working on very hard right now is a collection of poems related to Moby Dick
Mm-hmm.
or Melville, and we're coming up on the 200th anniversary of Moby Dick next year. So I would like to finish the manuscript
Sure.
and get it published by then. I had a 2-week residency on Martha's Vineyard a couple
Ooh.
years ago where I focused on that project.
Now that's interesting. I've always been curious about that because I read in Poets and Writers magazines, and there are these things, different residency programs, and so did you have the project in mind when you went to, or did it come to you when you were there?
No, I had the project in mind. It was part of the proposal that I included
Okay.
when you apply for a residency. Frequently, they ask you
Okay.
to give
So
you
you need to have an
proposal
idea
of what you.
for a residency before you can't just like show up and I'm going to be inspired. It
I
doesn't
think
really-
that's generally the case.
Okay.
With this one, they didn't hold you accountable for that,
Oh, I see.
but I think everybody who was there had a project in mind and did seriously work on it.
Okay.
We also went out to eat together and, you know,
Oh, good.
part of the time.
So how many other poets were at that
Well,
residency?
those
or was
weren't
it
all
different
poets.
artists? Okay, so it was
They
different
were all
artists.
writers, but they
Writers,
weren't all
okay.
poets. But we
Okay.
still keep in touch by email.
How
And
neat. Yeah.
so it was a wonderful experience.
Well, and how perfect, what a great location if you're going to write about Melville, to be in Martha's Vineyard, sort of out there in the
I've-
ocean. And
Very little experience with the ocean, so
yeah.
I felt that I needed that. I didn't get to Nantucket yet, but I need
Okay.
to do that still.
Okay.
But I did go to New Bedford, where there's a big whaling museum, which is
Oh, wow.
fantastic.
Okay. So it sounds like you got a lot of good research for it. Did you bring any poems from that project?
I
or?
think I have one. Yes, it's a golden shovel. Actually.
Oh, okay. All right.
This one was published in the Prairie Light Review. And the quotation is, "Better to sleep with a sober cannibal than a drunken Christian."
Okay.
That's one of my favorite quotes from Moby Dick. And the title of the poem is "Ishmael Writes to a Friend Back Home." But you'll hear those words, "Better to sleep with a sober cannibal than a drunken Christian." Depressed with life on land, I thought it better to head for Nantucket and set sail to find contentment on a whaling ship rather than sleepwalk through another winter. I left home alone with meager possessions. In New Bedford, I met a harpooner, an experienced whaler, sober and strong. Queequeg was a cannibal, but so congenial, more like a brother than a friend. His mistake? Trusting me to select a ship. I picked the Pequod, whose captain was drunken with vengeance, having few values I'd call Christian.
Oh, neat. Wow, that's great. Now, so in that case, you were using a quote from a prose.
From Moby Dick, yes.
So I didn't realize that you had that latitude. I thought it had to be a poem with the golden shovel.
Well, I take that latitude anyway.
You took it. You got it. All right. No, that sounds great. So do you have, do you know where do you have a publisher interested at this time?
No, I
Are
haven't
you
actually.
looking?
I haven't really started looking, and I need to do that, but I still have a few more characters and incidents that and maybe quotes that I feel I
Yeah.
need to deal with. I haven't said anything about the whiteness of the whale yet, for instance.
Oh, okay.
I've
But
been-
now he wrote a lot of books.
He did, but I'm
You're just
focusing
focusing
on Moby Dick.
Moby Dick. Okay. All right. So is so did you read it in school, or when did you
No.
discover Moby Dick?
Well, a few years ago, I decided, since I'd not read the great literature in college, I needed to fill in my education.
Okay.
And I do a fair amount of driving, and I like books. At one time, I had an office in Evanston. I live in Bolingbrook.
Okay.
And I would come home during rush hour, and I would have trouble staying awake. I found that books on, it was tape then, but,
Yeah.
or CD, kept me awake better than the radio.
Oh, yeah.
So I started listening to recorded books. And I've listened to Moby Dick at least 3, maybe 4 times.
Wow.
And I have a couple of annotated editions, including the, I think it's the Longmans edition that shows you where it got changed in England. Like, they didn't like coarse language, and they didn't like anything that was kind of heretical or
Okay.
they thought was unchristian. And when he compares the head of the king being anointed in the coronation to a head of salad,
Okay.
they took that out.
Oh, that's bad. Okay. All right.
So, and when my husband drove me out to Martha's Vineyard and back, and we listened to Moby Dick on that trip. It took pretty much the whole trip because it's
Oh,
a very
wow.
long book.
That is a very long book. I do kind of feel sad for the narrator.
Well, I assume they got paid by
I
the
guess
hour.
so. Right, that would be quite a job. Wow. Well, I wish you the best of luck on finding a publisher. It sounds like a
Thank you.
very exciting project. And do you have new ideas for future residencies, or are you just focused right now on trying to complete this one? And
You mean projects?
Right. I'm
Right.
sorry.
Well,
Or
I-
I guess I was thinking you had to have an idea or a kernel of an idea to apply for a residency.
I haven't applied for another residency lately, and I would have applied to go back to Martha's Vineyard, but they lost the house where they had them, so they're not having them there.
Okay, when you say they lost the house, was that because of financial difficulties or because of like the ocean came and?
No,
Right.
the house was owned by a woman who let them use it for the
Oh, I
residents.
see. Okay.
And it happened to be an old sea captain's house, which was
Oh, how
cool.
perfect! Yeah.
But she decided that she needed to sell the house, so
Oh,
they haven't
that's
found a new
Oh, I see.
place.
Okay.
But I have hoping sometime to do a whole book of nature poems and a whole book of stolen line or borrowed line poems.
Okay.
So if I live long enough, I could publish several more collections.
Well, you're definitely
Yeah.
prolific. You
It's,
write a lot. I mean, and what is your practice? I mean, do you write every day, or do you?
I wish I could say that I wrote every day.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of times, several times in April, I've done a poemathon as a fundraiser.
Okay.
And the idea is you're supposed to write a poem every day in April, but I have never promised I would finish in April, just
Okay.
that I would produce 30 poems. So the people who sponsor me get to see the 30 poems when they're done.
Okay.
And this year, because my husband was sick and I was sick, I still haven't quite finished. This is the
Oh, I
longest
see.
it's taken,
Okay.
but I have 3 more poems to write for my
For your 30.
April poemathon.
Oh, okay. That's a very,
So-
I've seen a couple of other poets who've done that. That's a wonderful fundraising idea. I think Leonard Lund does something similar.
I'm not sure he might.
Because I know, is it St. Baldrick's? I think he
That's
writes
right,
poems for
yes.
cancer. And
Right.
and then I want to say Carolyn Johnson has also done
She has done it.
that as well.
There's another
So-
poet whose name escapes me right now that I think started it in this area.
Okay.
But
But I like the fact that, see, I've always thought, what a fabulous idea, but I've been hesitant to try to commit because I was like, oh, there's no way I can do it in the month of April. So I like that you give yourself that that latitude. Well, we have about probably time for maybe one more poem for you to read if you could.
you want a funny one or a
Sure,
serious
let's
one?
go. Let's go funny.
This is a little bit funny, I think. It's called Wanting to See the Amazon.
Okay.
It was published in After Hours. When I say I want to see the Amazon, he assumes I mean the statue of Penthelia in the Louvre. He's thinking perhaps of the exposed breast, legs bare from boot top to kneecap. He's thinking warrior, woman. I'm thinking river, rainforest. He says Achilles killed her, removed her helmet, was so stunned by her splendor, his heart stopped. He says Achilles wept for love that might have been. The river flows not from tear ducts, but tributaries. It's not salt water, but fresh. It shoves sentiments out to sea. It has no sword. While I think of the Amazon's mouth opening into the Atlantic, he thinks of the Aegean Sea and the sneering lips of the statue, or sensuous lips of the lifeless woman lifted by Achilles. He says the Amazons originated in Pontus. He says I say the waters flow from peaks in the Peruvian Andes. He lies on the love seat, pondering the sad end of Penthesilea. I ordered tickets to tour Brazil and Peru, not Paris or Pontus.
One word, two different directions.
Yes.
Right. That is fun.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for coming and being my guest today. It's been wonderful to talk to you and hear about your process and your projects. We wish you the best of success in getting a publisher. Any publishers out there, please contact Wilda. Yeah, especially that, I love the poems about your uncle, and that sounds like
A lot of
very
people
special
say they
book.
love my uncle because of my poems, so
Oh, wow.
I feel good about that. But I thank you.
Yeah.
It's been an honor to be here today and be on your podcast. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Well, yeah, no, and we'll come back anytime, and we'd love to have you a guest as a guest again, either as a featured poet on one of our events, or when you get published.